Alright, so just in case that got cut off, alternate interior angles on the opposite sides of the transversal and inside the parallel lines. So if we're looking at our diagram, inside our parallel lines is going to be 3, 4, 5, and 6. So 3 and 6, 3 and 6, they're on opposite sides of that transversal line, and they're inside the parallel line. So that means those are an example of alternate interior. We can also say that these lines are congruent, or these angles are congruent. So angle 3 is congruent to angle 6. Another example, if we're looking inside the parallel lines and on opposite sides of the transversal, 4 and 5 are also going to be an example of alternate interior angles. So those ones are equal to each other. So we could also say angle 4 is congruent to angle 5. So angle 3 is congruent to angle 6, and angle 4 is congruent to angle 5. Those are both examples of alternate interior. Alternate exterior is pretty similar. The only difference is we're looking on the outside of the parallel lines. So these are angles on the outside of the parallel lines. And opposite sides of the transversal. So now we're looking on the outside, so we're going to ignore those ones. We're going to be looking at 1, 2, 7, and 8, because those are on the outside of the parallel lines. So on opposite sides of the transversal are going to be 2 and 7, and 1 and 8. So we know that 1 is going to be congruent to 8 because that's a property of alternate exterior angles, and 2 is going to be congruent to 7 because that's the property of alternate exterior angles. So we know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 8, and angle 2 is congruent to angle 7. So alternate interior and alternate exterior, those are congruent angles. Corresponding angles, these are angles that lie in the same spot, in the same location, but on a different line. So what I mean by that is, if we're looking at A, 3 is the bottom left angle. So if we look at B, 7 is the bottom left angle. So that means 3 corresponds with 7. Now if we do a different one, let's say angle 1, that's the top left angle. So the top left angle of L would be 5. So 1 corresponds with 5. And we also know that these angles are going to be congruent because we already labeled from the alternate interior and the alternate exterior. So corresponding angles show angle congruence. And if angles are correspond, then that means angle, for example, let's do a different one, 2, which is the top right. So angle 2 is going to be congruent to angle, well, what corresponds with 2? Remember, we're in the top right. 6 is in the top right. So it's going to be 2 is equal to angle 6.